is in Greece. Okay, so it's not in Asia Minor where he did his Asia Minors like Turkey and Iraq and Iran and that area. And that's where he did 2 of his missionary trips. But this one, he went up and then he went into Greece. Okay? And if you know anything about Greece in the 100 BC or something like that, very Gentile. They didn't believe in God, they believed in 26 gods. And they had statues for all these gods. And you watch all of the movies about ancient Greece, and they're got the armor and all that, and they're praising these gods, and the gods are fighting with each other. And so that's kind of the way they got brought up. They didn't know about a single God who controls everything and loves us. In fact, in Athens, they had a park, and it had statues of like all of their gods, and they had one statue to the unknown God. They didn't know, but they sensed there was somebody else out there. So they had a sense in their minds, there's something more here. And when Paul went to them, he preached. It was called Mars Hill, and that's where all the smart people went on Sunday afternoon or whatever it is. And they would get up there and they would get into debates with each other. And so the Greeks were very much wanting to discuss these things and argue their points and convince somebody else, whatever. And Paul went up there with all these intellectual people, if you want. And here's this guy, he's from the southern Turkey and the Israel area, and he goes up and he debates with them. And he apparently debated very successfully with them. And you think he can hold his own against even these, quote, smartest people in the world. And he even said, you know, I'm talking about Jesus, I'm talking about God. He says, you guys even know about him. There's a statue right there for him, the unknown God. So he used that to tell them who that God is. And so apparently quite a few Greeks came to Christ. And Colossae was one of the churches that did come to Christ. Okay? What is Paul doing up here? He's in Rome. Okay, right now he's in Rome and he's under house arrest. Hi, Shannon.
Hi.
So he's under house arrest, okay, for what he's been preaching. Okay, he's not in a jail, he's not in chains, he's in this room, and apparently there's a Roman guard in there with him, and he gets visitors coming to him, and then he sends visitors out, and so it's he's doing his ministry entirely. It's just that he's not going outside the house. That was the problem. So he's in Colossae, in Rome, and he's writing this letter to the Colossians. There's a couple of other letters that he wrote. He wrote the letter to the Philippians. Philippi is a city also in Greece, not too very far away from Colossae. And he also wrote to Galatians, and what was the other one that he did there?
Philippians.
Ephesians, I think, yeah. So he spent the time there writing theological letters to these people, and with the people in Colossae, he's congratulating them. He said, "You never even met me, and you have become such good Christians. I congratulate you, especially with all of the other things that you have to deal with, like all the 26 other gods that they all grew up with." Okay? And you got to imagine when he's talking to these people, he's telling them things that they had never heard before. And nowadays, you turn the TV on and you can see one of 10 really, really good pastors on there, and you know, oh yeah, I heard about that before, because we kind of brought up with this. They never did. They were in a very Gentile, intellectual mindset kind of society. And now he's talking to them about God, who sent his son to die for us, to take our sins. That's like, whew, you gotta be kidding me. Okay? Well, he wasn't kidding. And apparently the people have responded to it, and he's congratulating them. One of the problems that they still have, and we just finished it last week, is there was a heresy going on. You know what a heresy is? What's a heresy?
False doctrine. Like false doctrine.
It's false doctrine to the person, at least to me, it's because it's different than me, so it's got to be a heresy. Okay, to them it seems okay, but
isn't it something against the will of God?
what?
Isn't it something against the will of God?
But it does, especially in this case, it certainly is. But a heresy is something that is different from a certain way of thinking. Okay? And what it does is it brings its own ornaments into that. Okay? Christianity doesn't have very many ornaments back then. Okay? In fact, they said they don't want that stuff. They just want your relationship with God. And the heresy people, they say, well, no, wait a minute. You got to do things for him. You got to have burnt incense, and you got to do this and whatever. And Paul goes, no, you don't have to do any of that stuff. And even the Jews, they, if anything, you know anything about the Jewish religion, they had certain festivals that happened 7 times a year, okay? And during those festivals, you had to do certain rituals, and then you couldn't, in just normal life, you couldn't do this, you couldn't do this, you couldn't eat certain meats, certain vegetables, you couldn't do that stuff. Those are all things that you were supposed to do to show God that you love him. And Paul is saying, you don't have to do that stuff. When you're a Christian, you don't have to do all of those things. Those were things in the Old Testament, and they were foreshadowing what was going to happen in the New Testament. And once Christ came and died, all of those things go by the wayside. Where you're looking at a higher level of what do you do. And God is looking at your heart and your mind. He's not looking at whether you're eating pork chops or not. Okay? That's not what he's looking at. Okay? So Paul is talking about these heresies and telling them, watch out, folks. You're doing really well with your growing in Christianity, but watch out for these heretics. Okay? And there's 2 kinds. There's Judaizers, and then there's Gnostics. Okay? The Judaizers, those were basically Jewish people who became Christians, but then they're demanding that anybody who is going to become a Christian has to become a Jew first. Why would they think that?
It's kind of funny. It's kind of funny. It's like a process.
But it's because it was their process, and that's the only way they knew God, so they have to go through their process to be accepted.
Sure.
I understand that. It's just funny that.
Yeah, that's what it is this is the way we always did it. And if you're going to be a Christian, you got to do this as well as we did. And not a lot of people wanted to do that. One of the things is you had to be circumcised. That scared a lot of guys off. But then also, they just didn't want to have to take on all of these other things if I want to reach God. I want to reach God. Are you telling me I got to do all this first? And that's what they were doing. They said you could not become a Christian unless you became a Jew. And they were called Judaizers. So almost every time Paul was on a missionary trip, and every time he went, whenever he went to a town, he said, where's the synagogue? Oh, it's over there? He went over there and he preached. And he did that every single time. So that he was preaching in all these synagogues on these trips. And in doing so, as he was preaching, Judaizers were following him. And when he talked and finished, they came in and said, that guy is crazy. He's trying to lead you to hell. Don't listen to him. Here's what you got to do. You got to be a Jew first. So there was this real clash of wills, if you will, and of methods of approaching God. So the Judaizers were part of his bane for his whole ministry. Okay. In fact, he wound up in Rome because he was speaking so hard against the Judaizers in Jerusalem that they were plotting to kill him. And he went to the Romans for help. Not help, but for protection. And he said, I'm a Roman citizen. He was, by the way. Very important. He was a Roman citizen. And he said, since I'm a Roman citizen, I demand a meeting with Caesar. And he could do that. Any Roman citizen could do it. That didn't necessarily mean that you got an audience with him, but you could demand it. And so they took him and they sent him to Rome. Okay? So the Judaizers were one of them. The other one was the Gnostics. The Gnostics, I don't know if you heard anything about them. But if somebody says, I'm an agnostic, well, what's an agnostic?
Somebody who doesn't know. They don't know. They're not certain. They don't know.
Some of them are saying, I'm agnostic because I don't know which one to believe. Okay? I haven't made up my mind, so I'm an agnostic. Others have made up their mind, but they want to worship things on earth. They want to worship trees. They want to worship the way you behave yourself. They want what you eat. I mean, a whole series of things that are man-made. They follow those, and they believe that's the way that you get to a higher power. They're not saying that's the way to get to God. They're not saying that God is in charge of this, but they're saying that's the way you can be a good person and please the heavens, if you will. So those two groups are also trying to convince the people in Colossae that they're right. Okay? Ever notice that? Everybody thinks they're right. That's just about the thing. Everybody thinks they're right. But is that true?
Nope.
If I thought I was wrong, I'd change.
Of course they think it's right. Yeah, whatever you believe, you gotta believe that's right. But if you didn't, you'd say, wait a minute, I better change and believe this instead. You know, and when you get into it, especially, you ever get people who absolutely believe they're right? Yeah. And they'll die on the spot because they're right and you're wrong? Boy, those are irritable people, aren't they? Sometimes they're Christian people too, and that doesn't bode well for God to be that kind of person. But nevertheless, so he is telling them, okay, I love what you're doing, but you got to watch out for this heresy that's attacking Colossae as well, and stay away from it. Okay? So then we're getting into our part here, where he is congratulating them again and saying, okay, you've already become Christians. You have put aside all these earthly things. You have died in Christ. What does that mean, that they've died in Christ?
Giving their life to him. They've given their lives to him and his ways.
Well, yeah, in a way that is, because what he's telling them is, if you're going to become a Christian, you have to die to the rest of this world. You got to die to that. And you've got to take on what Jesus is telling you and how he's behaving and get rid of this. So when somebody says, well, I've died to that, well, that means they have rejected it, they've stopped believing it, and they're believing what Jesus is saying. Okay? So he's in this section right now where he's telling them about, if you've already died to Christ, why are you doing these things? And it's a good question. Okay? So I'd like to, somebody, the Bible, if you could read 11 and 12. George did 11 real well last week, and we just got to add 12 onto it.
When you came to Christ, you were circumcised, but not by physical procedure. Christ performed a spiritual circumcision, the cutting away of your sinful nature. For you were buried with Christ when you were baptized, and with him you were raised to new life, because you trusted the mighty power of God, who raised Christ from the dead.
Okay. So again, one of the concerns back then was this idea of circumcision. Some people did it. I mean, some non-Jews did it, and some people just said, I'm not going to do that. And what Paul is saying is, you were circumcised with a circumcision not performed with hands, but with your spirit. Okay? The Jews had the circumcision because they were saying that's a way of taking the sins of the flesh and throwing them away. And he's saying, you've been spiritually circumcised. In your mind, you've already done that. So don't get hung up on the idea of circumcision of the body. That's done with hands and a knife. Okay? And then he says this thing about baptism. He says, having been buried with him in baptism, in which you were also raised with him through faith in the working of God, who raised him from the dead. Buried with him in baptism. Does that sound strange to you? Or does that sound like something you already know?
It's part of our faith.
It's part of our faith. Has everybody been baptized? As adults? Okay. Well, what do they tell you when you go to be baptized? There's a tub of water. Now, some places may be sprinkling you. Okay, the Roman or Orthodox Church will sprinkle you with that, and most of the Protestants will immerse you in a tub of water or in a river or in a lake or in the middle of the Atlantic. I don't know where, but they'll put you underwater. Why do they put you underwater? What is the symbolism of that?
You've been buried.
Dying.
That's what it is. That you're being buried underwater for 2 seconds, but you're buried underwater, and when you come up, you have been raised back to life by Christ. Okay? That's what the idea of a baptism is. You've died to the world, and you've risen through Christ. Okay? And so what he's saying that you've all been raised already by having died with Christ and then being raised in your baptism. Okay? Got it? Okay. Now we can move on. Anybody read 13 and 15? 13 through 15. Sherry, would you do this? We gotta hear your voice a little bit.
When you were dead in your sins and in the uncircumcision of your flesh, God made you alive with Christ. He forgave us all our sins, having canceled the charge of our legal indebtedness which stood against us and condemned us. He has taken it away, nailing it to the cross. And having disarmed the powers and authorities, he made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross.
Okay. What is this certificate of debt? This is really important in Christianity. We don't use it as a term, but it's a philosophy that we really use.
What are you asking? What was the question?
What is a certificate of debt anyway? Especially, he's saying something to the people in Colossae that this is something that they are familiar with, a certificate of debt. Okay? So if you owed somebody money, okay? If you owed somebody money, there was a certificate that you owe them. Something like that. Okay? And everybody would know it. And you had to work it off. You had to work off that. And when you did work it off, whoever the magistrate is or the person, whatever, they would take that, they'd go to the town square, and they would nail it on the post that where you posted all of the notices for the city. Okay. So what he's saying, and you weren't free of debt until that was done. And when that was done, that's it. Nobody can hold it against you. So what did Jesus do with the certificate of the debt?
He went and before all the false gods that they were worshiping and said, these are mine, so you can't have them.
See, a debt could be a money thing, okay? It could be $100, whatever. Or a debt could be that you you abused somebody and you have that as a debt, or that you have done something sinful, and those are debts as well. They may not be debts to another person, but they can be debts to God. And here, Paul is telling them that through Christ, you can have all of those sins eliminated. And by believing in him, he will, bless you, by believing in him, he will erase all of those debts. How do you think that sounds to somebody who has never heard this before?
Too good to be true.
Hmm?
Too good to be true.
Too good to be true. You gotta be kidding me, Paul. God, tell me something true. Hey, don't give me all of this pie stuff. But Paul is saying, wait a minute. This is the way Jesus worked. Okay? Can I work off all of those sins? If this is all of my sins, can I work off every one of those? Maybe it's a good idea to do that, but I can't do that and approach God. He is not impressed with how many things I've worked off. What is God impressed with?
The sacrifice.
This is a critical point of
Surrender and obedience.
not just in Colossae, but
Surrender and obedience.
being surrendered
And obedience.
and obedient. Obedient to whom?
The Lord.
Hmm?
The Lord.
Yeah. See now, this is very different, because you mean I've been such a bad person all my life, and all I've got to do is say I believe in you, and I want you to come in my heart and change my heart, and all those bad things are going to be erased. What does Paul say? Yes, that's what I'm telling you. And they all got to be like, wait a minute, this is too. Think what happens after the meeting's over. Okay, we always think of somebody preaching. How about when the meeting's over? Our church, all people gather around and we talk and all that kind of stuff. Well, they must have talked too. And they must have said, do you know what he just said? He said that all we have to do is recognize God, and we have to submit to him and say, I take away all those things that I thought I was right. That's not right. You are right, and what you are saying is the thing that's correct. And what else do I have to do? So what else do I have to do?
Die to your old self, right?
Hmm?
Die to your own self, right?
You're going to die to your own self, but hopefully you've done that once you've already said, Lord, I give myself to you. Okay? And you're the one who rules, not me. In a way, you've already done that. Okay?
It's a trust from that point on, walking faith with him, allowing him to lead you.
Yeah. See, most people talk about working off this debt by physically working, or getting cash, or apologizing, or whatever. But those aren't bad things. But that doesn't get you straight with God. Okay? Now, he wants you to do those, but that's not part of what, it's not his requirement for you to be saved by him. What's required is that you say, you're the God, I'm not, and I want you to come into my heart and change me. Okay? And once you do that, then he just takes this, and he takes your certificate of debts, and he nails it to the spiritual thing and says, it's gone. Okay? I don't know whether they erased them. My guess is not. They probably said a big X. It's done.
Is that like your receipt?
Hmm?
Like your receipt?
Like a receipt, in fact. Okay? Now the Judaizers say, that's great, but you need a receipt. You got to go get circumcised. Paul said, no. You don't need a receipt like that. You don't need a receipt by celebrating all the Jewish holidays, or not eating lobster and pork, and all those rules that they had. Do you know that the Jews had something like 700 rules that they had to follow? They weren't all biblical. A lot of them were Pharisaical laws that they said. Okay, but I think I read it was like 711, something in that neighborhood. But you can't even remember 700 laws. They could, but you couldn't. And if you've messed up on any one of them, well, you're a sinful person. Okay? So Paul is saying, forget that. That's not the case. What you've got to do is come to God on your knees, spiritually or physically on your knees, and say, Lord, I want to throw away my old life, and I want to put my life in your hands, and come into me. And He'll never refuse that kind of a question, that kind of a request. So that's what he is writing to the Colossians, is to remember this. And again, what I keep saying from here as we've been doing this is he is in Rome. He's not in Jerusalem or in the Jerusalem area where everybody knows about this stuff. He's telling them something for the first time they've ever heard it, okay? Or the second time, or something like that. Okay? What kind of comments do you have?
Just remember, Paul is using at the same time. Is bringing a new message, but using a framework of understanding that they already knew, kind of a pegs on which he's going to hang this new gospel of Jesus. On the one hand, he's in Colossae, commercial city, so the whole idea of date and certificates of dates is clear in their mind. So when he uses that imagery, it's easier for people to follow him because they know what it represents. Now, what is standing for that date becomes the questions. Now, how is it paid? So in terms of his, as a good teacher, is using clear metaphors that were already practiced to hang on this message of the gospel to make it as clear as possible. So him using this language, because we're far removed from him, it seems to be a lot of exercise, but for his hearers, it's actually explaining it at the simplest form possible. What Christ has done is actually paying off your debt. Somebody else came in and said, hey, yes, I know, I acknowledge they owe you, but I pay it. And this certificate is already crossed. It's done. So on the communication as a teacher is using a very practical way of teaching that will allow people to understand that actually, yes, I know I owe, and it's paid. Whether it is a spiritual debt or they understand the concept. For those who come from a Jewish background, they still understand. They know. The Jews will understand the concept of ransom. They will understand. So it's still those pegs that is holding on. He's not bringing, it's using a language that everyone will be able to understand. Both Jews and non-Jews will understand, either from a business commercial practice or from a spiritual perspective. They will understand this idea of a debt is being paid. The challenge is I don't see how I've done it. But the Jews have an understanding. They knew annually they will sacrifice an animal, the scapegoat will be given, and suddenly their sins for the entire year have been paid off. So that idea is there in the mind of those who are hearing him, who come from a Jewish perspective, that actually it's being paid. An animal is carried, whatever we've done, I don't need to do it anymore. So they have that idea in mind. The challenge is that element of too good. Because now, the symbolism we understand in the mind, but where is that lamp that will carry our sins away? Where is that certificate for the commercial people that will be nailed to announce that actually it's been paid? That's where narrowing that gap of understanding becomes very crucial. For Paul, he wanted really to demonstrate the story of Jesus, that we're telling you what he has done, being hanged on the cross, is actually that certificate that is being nailed to declare that actually the debt has been paid. And nobody should take you at any other length of guaranteeing that actually you've been paid, your debt has been cleared already. Don't live as though you still owe God something to prove something, because that debt has been paid and we have the certificate Christ was nailed on the cross.
Yeah.
So and getting them to appreciate that act, a once and for all act, that you will not do it twice or three times, has been done, and as that done deal, God has embraced you, has accepted you. That's the beauty of Paul's choice of all these imageries that he's using. Therefore, don't be even tempted to think about, oh, you need to be circumcised in the flesh, the cutting off of your skin, because that has been done, and it's a once off, done for you, the spiritual circumcision that you've received. So the language, for us, it may be a little bit far removed, a little bit, lots of exercise in the mind, but for the people of Colossae, both in the non-Jews who understood the dynamics of the business transactional element, as well as those who come with a little bit of a Jewish spiritual perspective, both of them will get their understanding clarified in their mind on this. All Paul is wanting to do is reinforce that you don't want to be tempted by these ideas of the Judaizers. They're taking you back. You actually got it already. So be careful. Don't fall for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I'd have to elicit some kind of comment. That's true, right? Is that what we believe? Really, is that what we believe? Do we believe something like that?
You have to get it in you. You got to get that so solid in you so that whatever comes against you just bounces off.
Right.
Your oneness with Christ, the identity that He's given you, has to be the thing that you base everything on.
Exactly. So when I say, do we really believe that? Well, yeah, we really believe that. That's part of our nature now. That's part of our new nature, is we not just believe it, we embrace that. Okay? But other people can come up to you, and especially to somebody who's not been around being a Christian for a while, and they can say, you really think that's right? Don't you have to do something else? Don't you have to go out and buy an animal and have it sacrificed? Or don't you have to go on a fast for 40 days? Or don't you have to do something in order to get this? And what's the answer? Well, you can go do that, but that's not the answer to having this erased. You have it erased by inviting God into your life and saying, Lord, I am sorry for what I've done. Now think about that. If you're a person and somebody comes up to you and says, I'm sorry for something that I did. How are you impressed by that? Or are you not impressed by that?
You got an opener door. Your door is more open when someone comes to you that way.
When somebody comes to you and not, Sherry, I gotta apologize for this because you gotta forgive me. Is that a good way to apologize? No, that's like, go apologize to your dog instead, and not me. That's not the way God wants you to come in. He wants you to come in, no kidding, with your heart in your hand, if you will, and saying, Lord, here's my heart, change it. And when somebody comes to you in something like that, and we as humans have even a problem, but you almost can't turn that down.
Yeah.
Okay? When somebody is really, really that repentant on something, well, God knows that. He knows your heart already, even before you came in to see Him. He knows your heart. And so when you ask Him, He does. He puts that X right through your certificate of debts. Okay?
So, the first thing that I'm thinking, if you're a Jew in that day and time, and even today, and you're prideful, and you want to be forgiven, inside you, which one is going to be harder? A list of things to do, or actually changing your heart?
That is a very good question. Which is easier? What's an easier thing to do? To change your heart or do a list of tasks?
With dealing with yourself, the lists of tasks are easier to do if you don't want to confront yourself.
See, because when you give him your heart, you have got to really look inside yourself first.
Yeah.
And say, man, I'm evil, if you will, in this area, and this area. You gotta look inside, okay? If it's only a list of here's 10 tasks that you got, oh, okay, I can do those. Oh, I'm down to number 6 already. I'm almost there. See?
I'm proud of that.
I'm proud of that.
It's not just that though. As society, we think that if I did something wrong, I have to have a consequence.
Yes.
So having those consequences makes sense.
And then on the other hand, it's like, Alcoholics Anonymous, they go through these steps, and it's through those steps that their hearts change.
Yes.
So, you know, but you have to work on both.
In a way, yeah. But when you get down to it, doing the tasks is an easier thing to follow. Now, it's an impossible way to get there. So but the Jews had the 711 laws. If you followed 711 of them, you are holy. And they were very proud of how holy I was versus how holy you were.
Mm-hmm.
Because I have done this, and I got these robes on now, and you don't. And so that's right, you gotta leave. Okay, see you, BJ.
Thank you.
And so, it's a harder thing to do to get on your knees and say, Lord, I am a mess, and I need your help to come and fix this for me.
It's more of a head. When you do the list, it's more head. But when you actually do it, it's more of the heart. And that's where it needs to be, the heart.
Yeah, see? It's not doing the task, it's doing the task with your heart. And what does he judge us by?
Our heart.
Oh, darn it, right?
And
What a
if
sneaky
you do the
thing to
list,
do,
you
huh?
get into pride.
Right. What is the sin that God hates more than any other sin? What is it?
Right.
It's pride, right? That started right in the Garden of Eden. That was the first one right off the bat. Because when you've got pride, that means you think what? I think something of myself. Well, it's not bad to be proud, but it's not different to say, I am proudful and I'm leading with that pride. Now, if you just did something, I'm proud of that wall that I just built. Okay, that's nice. But if you're saying that is going to get me salvation, you got the wrong idea. Okay? And if you've got that kind of pride, it's very difficult to meet God who made everything. You made that wall maybe, but he made the universe. Okay? I think even if somebody comes to apologize to you, if they start to say, well, you know, I'm this and I did this, and I kind of want to say I'm sorry. Well, nice for you that you're doing all that stuff, but that doesn't help your apology at all. Because you're just doing that because you're hitting number 8 on the list. And I don't think anybody likes to be number 8 on the list. Okay? And God certainly doesn't. Right? So, that was really good. Bring that up.
Just a quick one. Marion mentioned something quite important. Many of the laws that the Jews were called to keep and remain part of their lives these days are not in and of themselves wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Because Paul even says the law is holy. So that's not the issue. The issue is not observing them was wrong. It is the order in which we look at them and what they do. If I do A, B, C, D, then I'm right with God. That's Jewish order. The Christian, even in the teachings of Paul, is God has made me right, therefore I do A, B, C, D. So it's not doing at all. It's I do it out of obedience because I belong to Him. So the work, that's what the New Testament will refer to them as works of righteousness. I'm made right, therefore I live right. For the Jewish understanding is, I have to do these things so that I can gain my righteousness. Then I'm the one doing and earning my righteousness. The Christian view is, he has made me right, and because I belong to him, I live a particular way. And that makes the whole difference. So, and that's where being saved by grace is not a license, I can do whatever I want. No. Actually, because I've been saved by somebody else who paid the price, who canceled my debt, I belong to somebody else and I live according to his precepts. So the order is different. The Jews were really self-centered. I need to do the work. I need to earn it. How much did I do? How much did I fail this time? How do I make up for it? It's all me doing the saving. The Christian view is God, through Christ, has done the saving. He's done it once and for all. And I follow him as I grow, striving to live, to reflect that which I'm already meant to be. That's the huge difference. So being stuck in legalism is actually believing I need to do A, B, C, D so that I can prove that God loves me, I'm accepted by the Lord. The one who's saved by grace, like all of us here, is he has done it. There's nothing else. Yes, the work has been done, but he did it. And all I do is live as saved. So that order makes a huge difference. So I can't, that Paul will use phrases such as, I cannot boast. I didn't work for it.
Right.
But there was work, but Christ did the work. Perfectly done. And all I do is accept that he has done it, and I'm the recipient of that favor, of his forgiveness, of his grace. I live in obedience, not to earn salvation, but because I'm saved.
Okay, I got a comment, okay. What I have found with me is that, okay, so we were giving the 10 Commandments, we were giving the law, and it's like, okay, you keep these, and you're gonna be righteous, you're gonna be good. But what it does, it keeps your mind focused on what you should and should not do. And when that gets there to be focused, and that's all you think about, you're going to have a tendency to do that. Now, when you get in your heart that you're saved by grace, and when these things come up, you're not looking at the do's and the don'ts, you're looking more at Jesus, and your heart changes, and you're like, I want to make Jesus happy. I want to walk in that grace, and I don't think about doing this or not doing that.
Yep.
I'm focused more on him.
Mm-hmm.
The 10 Commandments, is that a good thing?
Yes.
Well, yeah. Is there anything wrong with the 10 Commandments? No. But what is the wrong thing about the 10 Commandments?
It keeps you focused on doing.
It gets you focused on doing 10 things, or not doing those 10 things. And if you do or don't do those, then you're good with God.
Mm-hmm.
So the 10 Commandments, if you read them, those are things you probably ought to live by. Okay? Thou shalt not murder. That's probably a good one. Okay? And all the others. But then you get into, keep the Sabbath day holy. Okay, what does that mean now? Today is our Sabbath day. Keep it holy. What are you going to do? What are you not going to do today? That's a very interesting question, isn't it? So, if we're going to keep today holy, in our minds, where do we keep it holy?
We go to church.
Hmm?
We go to church.
Go to church. See, that's one thing. Does that make it holy? Have you kept it holy today? Well, it's a good thing to do it, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've got it. See, there is no black and white on that one. Murder is a good one because you either did it or you didn't. Okay, depending on what lawyer you have. And then, but the idea of keeping the Sabbath holy, that gets to be pretty judgmental. Okay, so what about, one of the Jewish laws, how far could you walk on the Sabbath day?
Mm.
You couldn't walk, was it a mile? Less than a mile.
Less than a mile.
Okay.
If you walked more than two-thirds of a mile, I think it was.
Yes, ma'am.
I just about sat down, I would've been on the floor.
I'm sorry.
Two-thirds of a mile or something like that,
Yeah, it was
and they broke the rules by putting a piece of their property there so that they could go another two-thirds of a mile farther, because it was considered their home if their property was there. It's,
So that was the point, is you can only walk so far, because you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath, right? And walking is considered work. So if you wanted to go see your neighbor, and your neighbor was 1.25 miles away from you, you couldn't see him on the Sabbath, right? Well, what the Jews did was they would walk up to the marker the night before, and then the next morning they'd cross over and see it. They did it on 2 days. So they didn't do it on the Sabbath. So here are these things you think are even, boy, that is a really strict law we could get. Well, people are clever, right? Well, you know, anybody's got kids, know what the kids can be. You can get around almost any law, okay, by how you explain it. And that's what they did. And so you're always fighting this feeling to do something, or the want to do something, and what the law is. And sometimes, like Deb said, that actually makes you sin more than if the law wasn't even there. Okay? Tell your kids, don't eat that piece of candy on the table. What have you just done in their mind? There's a piece of candy on the table, and I would really like to, and Mom said I couldn't eat it. How can I do that? See, it just, and that's with a kid and a piece of candy, but that's the way it is in life with us in regular life things. As soon as you said you can't do it, the question is, one, why not? Okay? And then, is there a way around that? Or is there a legal way, first, a legal way around it? If you're a kid, is there an illegal way around it? Okay? So by putting the law out there, you're inviting somebody to actually sin against that law. Okay? Now, what George was saying before, if you were a Jew, what would you think of what he said? You don't know anything about this Christ guy, but he just said something. If you were a Jew, never heard anything about it, what would you think of what he said?
You get your rocks and throw them at them.
Get your rocks and throw at him, man.
Blasphemy.
That's a heresy.
Heresy.
Okay? That's a heresy against my faith. And how can he be so stupid to think something like that? That you can have your sins forgiven by not even doing anything? What a dumb thing that is. And that could be in today's life. That somebody could hear that, and that's what they think. You mean I don't have to do anything? How much do I have to pay? You know, you think that there's something you gotta do. Well, the kicker is, well, there really is only one thing you have to do. Oh, really? What is it? You've got to turn your heart over to God and let Him control your life, not you. What do you mean by that? I mean, just think of the questions. You know, we think of those, but we don't think of those things because we've kind of got those somewhere in our spirit already. But if you were a Jew, never having heard this before, you would think that, you know, he's gone nuts. Nothing can be that good, right? That would be what you'd say. You're telling me that's something too good to believe. And if you're a Greek, never having heard any of this stuff, you gotta think that maybe this guy's crazy. Well, sometimes those kind of things actually strike you like, wow, that makes more sense than what I'm doing. Okay? In fact, when you get down to it, this makes a whole lot more sense than what we were doing beforehand, okay? As far as trying to please God. You're a little kid and you want to please Mom. What do?
You listen.
Be good.
be good, whatever good is.
Yeah.
Is that a black and white thing?
No.
No, not really, so you can't do that. You could sweep the floor, okay, that's pretty good. And I see kids sweep the floor, and I say, oh, that's kinda nice. In the realm of things, what is the little kid sweeping the floor? Nothing. Probably doesn't do a good job anyway. What do you reward?
Behavior.
The behavior, the mind behavior, that mom, if I sweep the floor, I want you to feel better for me. It's not sweeping the floor, okay? Because even if it was, there's always a speck down there that you missed. And mom will find it. Or your wife will find it.
That's what he wants.
So, it's the heart. And so, God measures the heart. And when you tell other people that God measures your heart, then they have that same question. Well, what does he measure by? What's his measuring stick? What is good and what is bad?
Is there a bell curve on that?
It probably is. Probably some that's really bad and some that's really good. But, so what he's telling the people from Colossae, he's talking to them about something that is to Greeks and Romans at the time was very foreign. It was like he was talking in Chinese, okay, and they did not understand it. But as people start to get a little bit more, they get to hear a little bit of it, and you can start to say, okay, that thing that George said, I heard somebody who said that once before, and that kind of happened. But even then, what did I tell you at the beginning of this, that he was warning the people of Colossae about? The heresies. Because somebody can give you a heresy. Would you know it if somebody gave you a heresy?
The more that you know the actual, yes.
Hmm?
The more you know the actual, yes.
See, that requires you to have some knowledge about what they're talking about, okay? But if you don't have that knowledge, then that heresy could be it sounds true to me. So, what's the worst danger about heresies?
They can spread.
Hmm?
They can spread.
They can spread, but they also sound good.
It sounds good.
They sound
Convincing.
good, yeah. Boy, if I went to church, then I thought, oh, well, okay, that's good. So I probably ought to go to church in order to, well, or whatever. The heresies are so close to the truth.
Mhm.
That's why heresies are so good.
Mhm.
I just read watched a thing on TV the other day about Jim Jones. Everybody remember Jim Jones from the
Kool-Aid.
70s, I guess, or whatever?
Yeah.
He went down to, finally went down to someplace in Central America with his
I believe
people.
it was Ghana.
Hmm?
I believe it was Ghana. Ghana,
Okay. Oh, you ready for something? Yeah.
yeah.
And 900 and something people drank Kool-Aid and died. And they knew they were going to do it.
Yeah.
He didn't say, hey, let's have a picnic, and then the Kool-Aid was poured. He knew it. They were already told about how to do this.
Well, they actually practiced it.
They
practiced it.
Yeah, they practiced it with water. And I never knew that about this until I saw it on TV. And then they showed the pictures of 900 people they're dead in the field. I mean, you can't believe it. But do you think that he must have been pretty persuasive about his heresy? He had 900 people commit suicide on purpose. I think there was like 17 of them escaped or something like that, or 30 escaped, but 900 of them did it because they believed the heresy. And he convinced them that that was the truth. And it was probably close enough to the truth that somebody could say, well, it probably is, I just don't understand the distinction. If somebody can tell you that, then they've got you. Right? We just finished the Christmas season. Okay? Is the Christmas season full of heresies?
Yes.
Hmm?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody ought to say yes. What are some of the heresies that we have in Christmas?
Not celebrated at the right time of year.
It's gotta be celebrated on December 25th, okay, that's one. How about the Christmas tree, is that a heresy?
Yeah.
There's no Christmas tree in the Bible, so you could say that, okay?
No Santa Claus.
No Santa Claus, no Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Okay? All of these things that we take as Christmas, we just unconsciously put them on the list of what is true about Christmas. Ask a kid will tell you everything. Okay? Well, there's presents and there's food and there's dressing up and there's Santa Claus and reindeers, and they'll tell you all of these things, none of which are in the Bible. Are they bad to do these things? Well, you can get an argument on some people. Some people will say, you do anything that's bad. Or others say, hey, okay, it's entertainment, it makes the kids feel good, okay. But what is the thing that really hurts the kids the most about Christmas, the heresy of Christmas?
When they find out there's no Santa.
Hmm?
When they find out there's no Santa.
Well, that hurts everybody. Everybody's gone through that one. But what is the worst thing about the Christmas heresy?
The focus.
Hmm?
The focus.
The focus, well,
The
certainly
present,
the focus
not
is
the
on the
sentiment.
presence, but it goes beyond that even. He knows who's been good and who's been bad. Okay? He's making a list, checking it twice. To find out who's been good is going to get a gift, and who's been bad is not going to get a gift. Right? Mom and Dad say that all the time. Be good or Santa's not, he's going to pass you by. I mean, you almost do that without thinking about it. But it's exactly what Christ is coming against.
Yeah, your
Is that
program.
you have to do good in order to be rewarded. And that's from the time they're 2 years old, all the way on, if you're good, you're gonna get a reward. Is it true at Christmas? Well, mishmash on that one. Sometimes it is, and other times the parents forget about that, they do it anyway. But it's giving you this thing of performance will get you a reward or not a reward. And when you hear what George just said, you think about it and say, wait a minute, that's not right. If you do good, then you get good things. And if you don't do good things, you don't get you don't get anything. So Christmas has got this underlying tone that nobody thinks about until you think about it. And as soon as you think about it, you say, we're probably doing our kids a little bit of harm here. Probably doing us a little bit of harm too. Okay? So anyway, just think about it for the whole year until you get to next Christmas, and promise yourself to not tell your kids that you do good, you get a good present. Okay? We'll have a test on it next year this time. Okay? Any comments for today?
Yeah, just on that note, because just forget what I yeah, I wanted to say that's when you sometimes you should appreciate, I should say, the power of the gospel, because with that background, let's say for the Jews, imagine now Peter standing preaching for the first time, 3,000 people come to salvation. That's a super miracle, because it goes against everything they've believed and practiced. They've been unconsciously programmed to latch onto. Simply accepting, what shall we do to be saved? The question itself is problematic, coming from the Jews. So what shall we do to be saved?
That was the question they asked, right?
They're the ones asking.
What do we do?
What do we do to be saved?
Right.
Just believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved. And 3,000 got saved in one service. That's a miracle. Because how did they get to that place? What convinced them? Was it the eloquence of Peter? No. is really the gospel. What Paul says in Romans, I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ because it is the power of God unto salvation for Greeks and Gentiles. There's power behind it. Otherwise, it goes against everything we grew up. Whether we were part of the Jewish tradition or non-Jewish tradition, it's something about us as humans that want us to earn, to have control over our lives, what we do, what we receive, that makes us feel worth because I did it. And the gospel is actually somebody else did it and gave it to you. If that simple gospel of it being done by someone else who offered it to you and you simply receive, if it changes you, it's the power of God. It can, because everything about us would go against that. We'll resist it. And many still resist it, but if we accepted it, it's because really the Spirit of God did the convincing in our heart and pulled us to Him. And we melted before Him. We were humble before Him. We were grateful. Oh my goodness. Wow. But that feeling is a miracle. It's not easy. It's not natural for humans after the fall.
Right.
Yeah. So that was my
That's
last
what-
word.
It's unnatural, isn't it? Is what we talk about becoming saved, is that a natural thing to do?
Nope.
It's not. It's very, very simple. But it's not the natural thing that we would do. And that means, it's just has God's handwriting all over it. Okay, we gotta go. So until next week. Well, Dad, we just thank you so much for your being here today.